Good day and welcome to Of Many Things. I am Father Matt Malone. I'm the editor-in-chief of American Magazine and president of American Media. And this weekly live stream during this time of crisis is an opportunity for me to engage with our audience, with our readers, to answer your questions and to offer my thoughts about what is going on in the church and the world, as I would in the column that I author in every issue of America called Of Many Things. And we've sort of been playing around with the format for the last few weeks and decided that in addition to having you and your questions and comments on this live stream, that we might also want to have a guest and have a dialogue from time to time. And we thought we would start close to home. So next Friday on this live stream at noon, I'm going to be joined by Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who is the Archbishop of New York. And as you know, he is one of the most prominent prelates in the United States today. We just saw in the news this week that St. Patrick's Cathedral, like so many churches and parishes throughout the country, is experiencing a profound financial crisis. And he's also had to face decisions like scores of other bishops throughout the Western world and beyond about whether to hold Mass, how and where to administer the sacraments, and so forth. So we're going to talk to him next week at noon on this live stream about all of that, and be sure to join us for it because he is he's a terrific person. He's a great leader, and he's a good friend to American Magazine, and I'm sure dealing with some pretty difficult stuff right now. Speaking of which, we have a series of decisions to make as a country and as a church. And perhaps you do too. You might have decisions to make in the next few weeks. What do I mean? So the big topic right now is, when is this country going to reopen and how is it going to go about doing it? And then, prescinding from that global question, there's the local question of, when do I go back to work? When do my colleagues go back to work? If I'm a boss or a manager, when do I call people back to work? In addition, there's a whole range of questions that people face about, their kids and schools and playgrounds and all this stuff. When does that reopen? When is it safe to return? There's a lot of decisions to be made in the next few months. And so I thought I would just, at the top of this program today, talk a little bit about decision making, and how, in the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, how he understands decision making, right? And because I think that practiced well, you can you can usually get a good result. In other words, you can usually rely on the data that you gather during the Ignatian discernment. I'll talk about that word in a second. You can usually rely on the data that you gather during Ignatian discernment to guide your decision making as you go along. So that's the first point. It's actually not called decision making when it comes to St. Ignatius of Loyola. And why is that? Well, he calls it discernment, right? So you are faced with choices. Sometimes it's a fundamental choice, like a vocational choice. Am I called to marriage? Am I called to religious life? Am I called to be a parent? Am I called into or out of this specific relationship in my life? Sometimes it's a vocational choice. Sometimes it's an occupational choice. Like, I know what my vocation is. It's as a priest and a writer, or as a parent and a spouse. I know what my vocation is. I've settled on that. But within that vocation, there are lots of choices to be made. What kind of parent do I want to be? What choices do I want to make for my children? Or in my case, what kind of work do I want to do as a priest? What kind of work do I want to do as a writer? And sometimes the choices are even smaller than that, but they're still important, right? Do I go to this wedding this weekend? Do I attend that funeral that's going to be on Tuesday? Do I use this money that I got in my tax return for the college education or fund, or for something else? Our lives are a series of choices. So, as I said, some really fundamental and big, and some small and not fundamental choices, but still important ones. How do we make them? Well, Ignatius, as I said, calls it discernment, and there's a reason why he calls it discernment and not decision making. Because decision making is something that we do mainly with our heads, right? This is a kind of crude caricature, but I'm sort of just, simplifying things to make a point. Decision making is something that we do primarily with our heads. We look at the objective data, right? That data which exists outside of us. So numbers on a spreadsheet or words on a piece of paper or what other people tell us. And then we take that data and we make a reasoned, rational analysis of it. And then we make a choice. That is a part of discernment. It's an indispensable part of discernment. So it's not like we are going to be leaving our heads behind or our capacity for reason behind when we enter into a discernment. We're going to be taking those with us, but we are going to complement the head with the heart. We're going to marry our heart to our mind. We're going to marry the body with the soul in our discernment, in our process of coming to make a choice. And how do we do that? Well, human beings, we come to know things in lots of different ways. We tend to think of knowing things as mainly an intellectual exercise. Somebody says, that building is brown, you have heard it, you have seen it, that thought is processed into your head. Right? But first it comes in through your senses. You have to hear what the person is saying. You have to see the building. You have to feel as if you are in a place to make a judgment physically. Right? So what that tells us is that our thinking is not a disembodied exercise. It's not strictly a mental exercise. Right? It involves the whole of us. Right? The entire human person is engaged in the process of thinking. And so St. Ignatius's point is the whole human person should be engaged in the process of discernment. So in facing a choice and in trying to choose what is for the best, we're going to engage our mind, we're going to engage our heart, we're going to engage our bodies in that process. In other words, we're going to gather as much data as possible in order to make this decision. And it might seem strange, like why would you bring your body into making a decision? Well, because our bodies tell us things, right? And our spirit tells us things. We've all had gut feelings, right? And that gut feeling that we have from time to time, that intuition we have about something, that's not just a mental thing. We talk about feeling it in our gut, right? We talk about having a physical response. When we become afraid, let's say that we have a phobia of some kind, like I used to have a phobia of getting on airplanes. It's not just a mental exercise. When I got on the airplane, I got sick to my stomach and I started to shake and my blood pressure would go up. There is an intrinsic relationship here between mind, heart, and spirit. So Ignatius says, we want to listen to all of that, right? We want to bring all of those parts of ourselves into the process. And we want to do it in a spirit of prayer. Why? Because discernment is not something that happens in isolation. It's always done in relationship with someone. Right? We're very rarely making a choice that has absolutely zero consequences for anyone else in our lives. And so in order to make a choice, an important choice that has consequences for probably lots of other people in our lives, or maybe one or two, but they're the most important people in our lives, we're going to have to start that process with the most important relationship in our lives, which is God. So discernment always happens in a spirit of prayer. And it is a process of questioning and listening. So what the gift that Ignatius gave us was a process for this discernment. And this is important to understand because when the Pope is using this word, discernment, and he uses that a lot because he's a Jesuit and he's a son of St. Ignatius, it's important to know what he's talking about. And he's talking about what I'm talking about, which is bringing our whole selves into a process of figuring something out, of making choices. So in this process of discernment, it begins with the process of prayer. We place ourselves in prayer. And then we call to mind, using the powers of our imagination, the various choices that we face, right? And for the sake of making it simple, let's say we have two choices here, A and B. And then using our imaginations with God as our guide, so asking God to guide us through this process, to guide our imagination, we begin to imagine what it might look like, what it might feel like, what it might be like when we make choice A or when we make choice B. And then we listen. We sit back and we listen. We entertain those works of imagination in our minds, and we begin to listen. We listen to our minds. What is the rational part of this? Does this feel rational? Does it feel irrational? In other words, do I feel like I'm doing something that is illogical, right? We begin to engage our minds in calculating the various outcomes and of thinking those through. But we also start in that process, we listen to the body. Like, how is my physical body responding as I think about these choices? As I think about A, as I think about B, what are the sensations? Is my body tightening up and closing in on itself, as we do when we're tense or scared? Or do I feel a kind of opening up of my body? Do my muscles start to relax? Does my mind, does my head, rather, the head on my shoulders start to feel less heavy? And then the most important questions have to do with those that really belong to the realm of the heart, to the realm of spirit. When I consider A or I consider B, which choice feels like an act of love, right? And which choice feels more like a cry for love, right? We know the difference, right? In a certain sense, every act of human beings is either an act of love or a cry for love. And the difference is the direction of the energy. In an act of love, our energy is dispersed outward. And in a cry for love, we're trying to draw energy in. So which does it feel more like? Another way of thinking about it is, does this choice feel more like an act of fear? Like I'm acting out of fear? Or does it feel more like an act of faith? Okay. So fear, again, it's the way to think about those two things is they're directional. So in fear, we feel as if we are moving away, almost running away from something, right? Or someone, or some feeling, or some experience or memory. In an experience of faith, we feel that we are running towards something, right? We are embracing something. And another difference is we're usually certain of what we are afraid of. Right? We're able to, we might not always know at first, but once we're able to say, yes, that's what I'm afraid of, we're absolutely certain of it, right? Well, faith is the opposite of certainty. So there's a kind of, there's a vagueness in our faith, which is good, right? It opens us up, as I said, to the world and says, I would like to say yes to that. And it's okay that I don't know where that yes is going to lead me. Right? There's a good example of this. I was at a wedding recently, and the father of the bride gave a really wonderful toast. And he said to his new son-in-law, he said, you know, when you proposed to my daughter, right, she was saying yes to today, meaning their wedding day. But when she made her vows today, here at our wedding, you were both saying yes to all of your tomorrows, to everything that is to come, right? No matter what it is, for richer, for poorer, for better, for worse, etc. Right? That's an act of faith. That's precisely what an act of faith is. It's a yes to that uncertainty. Another way to think about it, as you sort of bring together head, heart, spirit in this process, is, you know, what, as I can contemplate A and B, what is calling me out of myself, right? In what way does the world seem to be getting bigger? Does it seem to be getting bigger as I think about this possibility? Or does my world feel like it's getting smaller? Does it feel like by making so choice B instead of choice A, I'm actually closing in on myself and retreating from the world? Okay. Because actions of the Holy Spirit, and you might have heard some talk about this if you know something about Ignatian spirituality, as I know some of you do. St. Ignatius, you know, he believed, in the language of his time, he always described the world and the heart as a battlefield between the Holy Spirit and the bad spirit, the evil spirit. And the Holy Spirit is always calling us out of ourselves, always calling us to faith, always calling us to others. In the grace of the Holy Spirit, the world gets bigger in our imagination. But when the evil spirit is engaged, the world gets smaller. We become more afraid. We get trapped more in our heads, and we get trapped more in our bodies. We can actually feel ourselves tensing up. So that's just a little bit about what discernment is. And there are a couple of things to keep in mind about it. One, at the end of every discernment is an act of faith. So as I said before, at the end of every process of discernment, you don't have a certainty. What you have is the ability to say yes to a choice that you have come to think, come to believe is life-giving, that orients me outward, and that is going to bring engender love and faith and hope. Right? You're saying yes to that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're right, because in the end, you can't be certain in a discernment. It's not like 2 + 2 = 4, and that's why you have to bring in all of those parts of ourselves that don't deal with 2 + 2 = 4. Right? You have to bring in the heart and the spirit in addition to the head. I think the other thing to keep in mind on this is, and Pope Francis has reminded us of this from time to time, it's a process. Discernment is a journey. So if we're making a really big choice about what to do, we can't just sit down once for 20 minutes and go through this process and figure out what it is that we're going to do as the fundamental choice of our lives. We have to return to the process. We have to have discernment time and time again. And if it's a really big question, like a vocational question, we have to return to it often and pay attention to the patterns and so forth. And why is that important? Because it's we're very, very rarely choosing between A is good and B is evil. Almost all of our choices, as we're learning through this experience right now and this debate we're having in public, all of our choices are about weighing goods, right? A is good and B is good. They're good in and of themselves. The question is, which good should I pursue? And that's where discernment comes in. So if you want to learn more about that, you can find it at our website, americanmagazine.org. Just put discernment into our search engine, and you'll find about 20 articles. And there's a really great piece in our archives, which I just thought of, which is called Rummaging Through Your Day. It's a really good piece about how to begin on the work of discernment, if that's something that interests you. I know we have some questions, and we have several people who are joining us, Pilgrim subscribers from all over the country. And we say Pilgrim subscribers because they're people who are part of America, part of our audience, part of who receive the magazine and support America, but they also journey with us in our travel program. So, as you may know, twice a year we go on pilgrimage, and we invite our readers to come with us. So each spring we go to the Holy Land, and each autumn we go to somewhere else. Sometimes that's Paris, sometimes it's Spain, sometimes it's Rome, but they're all places where St. Ignatius has been. So we try to keep him at the center of our experience. And of course, Ignatius is always pointing to Jesus. So it's really Jesus who's at the center of our experience. The other thing I just want to mention today is Arbor Day. And I have to say, I don't know if anybody really, pays much attention to Arbor Day anymore, or if we ever did. But it's a really important holiday to me. I like trees. I'm not a tree hugger. I'm not one of whatever one might imagine that to be. I'm not a tree hugger, but I do really love trees, and here's why. Because to me, trees are a sign of the presence of God, and that might sound odd, but the thing about a tree is it naturally reaches for the source of its life, which is this greater thing that is far beyond and so much larger than itself. Right? But if you look at a tree, I mean, that's what tree branches do. They are reaching up for the light, reaching up for that source of light, of that source of nourishment. Right? It's what trees do. And trees can't help but do it because trees don't have free will like human beings do. Right? Trees don't have to discern whether they're going to reach for the sun. Right? They just do. And they don't have to discern whether that is the sun. They just know it. Well, they don't even know it. It's a pure natural phenomenon, right? But we who have free will, we don't automatically reach for the light. That light is given to us by virtue of being created and baptized. That light of God is within us. But we could always make mistakes. We can always mistake the darkness for the light, right? We can mistake an act of love for a cry for love. We can mistake an act of fear for an act of faith, and so forth. And that's why we need discernment, and why trees don't. And you might know that very famous poem, Trees, by Joyce Kilmer. I think that I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. I think are the first couple of lines, and then the last couple are, poems are made for fools like me, but only God could make a tree. And this is true, right? Human beings can do whatever we like with trees. We can build houses and boats and bats and so forth, but we can't make a tree. Only God can do that. And so Joyce Kilmer wrote this very famous poem about it. And the thing about Joyce Kilmer is he was a contributor to American Magazine. He wrote for American Magazine something like a dozen times in the early part of the 20th century, in our first years in publication. He was a convert to Catholicism, and he really came to faith through the death of his daughter, who died of tuberculosis. He was so distraught and so destitute that he, in that moment, he felt he had nowhere to turn but faith. That it was the only life preserver that he had at his disposal, and so he reached for it, he grabbed for it, and became a man of deep faith, and he became a popular poet, and he published frequently in America. Then in the First World War, He volunteered with the New York regiment. He was, as young men did in those days, and he went off to fight in the trenches of Europe. And unfortunately, he died at the Second Battle of the Marne, which was reported by a telegraph in America magazine. And so I've always said, we should remember Joyce Kilmer on Arbor Day, but we should also remember him on Memorial Day, because he was. And we're not just saying this because he was one of our own at America. I'm not saying that just because he was one of our own at America. But if you know his life story, then you know that he really was a simple, decent poet and patriot who died way too young in a forest among the trees. So there were a couple of questions left over from last week that I just wanted to take a look at because I know I didn't get to them before we run out of time. One was, what is the future of America Magazine? What does it hold? That's a really great question. Thank you. And, I've gotten that by email and by a letter from snail mail, as the kids call it, from a number of readers. Our future is solid. So the foundations of America are solid. And, so no one needs to worry about whether America Media is a going concern. We, for a variety of really complex reasons, we are better positioned than most to weather a storm like this. And so, but some have also asked, will you just stop printing completely and go online? Because more and more people are engaging with the content digitally. And the answer is, we may very well reduce the frequency of our print issues. So 110 years ago, we published a magazine every single week. Starting 6 years ago, we started publishing it every other week. We may move to publishing it once every month. And the reason why that is because of the amount of content that we're publishing digitally. So in a sense, even if we moved to a frequency in print that was monthly, America really is a daily. In fact, on some days it's an hourly. We publish several times a day, and sometimes every hour when the pace of events requires it. So it's not like we're going to be producing less content. We're actually going to be producing a great deal more, but it may be happening more on the digital side than on the print side. But print will never fully go away. I believe in it. I'm a believer in print, and I think you can do things in print you can't do anywhere else. You can go deep in print in a way that you can't digitally, and you can provide a physical space in which people can engage with an idea or a question in a more reflective and relaxed way, and that's important. It's important for what we do. We're an intellectual apostolate, and the Jesuits are called, and our colleagues are called to intellectual depth. One last question. How do you think parish life will be changed after this current crisis is over? Well, for parishes, thank you, Jane, for that question. Jane actually works in a parish, and I know her. She works in a parish here in New York. The crisis facing parishes on several fronts, right? So there's the immediate crisis, which is spiritual, which is parishes are not able to do right now what parishes are there to do, which is to accompany people in their spiritual pilgrimage and their life journey, and most importantly, to provide the sacraments, which are those special agents of God's grace. And they're not able to do that right now. So one way it'll change is they will start to be able to do that again. And so that's the best news of all. Secondly, there's a financial crisis that's facing all of the parishes and dioceses. Those basket that goes around at every mass, that $5 and $10 and $20 that people put in, whatever they can afford, that pays most of the bills in a parish. And for several weeks now, that basket has not been going around, and only a minority of contributions to parishes are done digitally. So there's going to be there is presently a financial crisis, but there is a big there's a big question to be resolved about how they're going to find their way forward fiscally in the weeks and months ahead. Well, they're going to rely on I was going to say our generosity, but not mine. I'm avowed religious, so I don't put money in the basket. But I actually use the money in the basket for the works of the church. But you do, and so they're going to be relying on the generosity of people in the pews to help them through it. But I think big picture, this crisis has afforded us an opportunity to think about, okay, number one, how can we be church? Can we be a ministry of the church outside of the work of the and I really believe that as important as those are, like the life of a parish isn't just the sacraments, right? So how are we a ministry? How are we church outside of the sacramental economy of the church, right? That's a crucial question, I think, because it's an underdeveloped theme in our ecclesial life. And this crisis presents us an opportunity to think about it. I really believe that every crisis contains an opportunity, and that's our opportunity, I think, our invitation to reimagine what kind of parish that we want to be. And lastly, I think it could have an effect on our parish life in that we see some people coming back to the sacraments and to Mass, because crises like this, well, they have a way of clarifying for us what we value and what is really fundamentally important. As they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, there are no agnostics in foxholes either, and there probably aren't very many lapsed Catholics in foxholes. Just ask Joyce Kilmer, right? When you get to heaven, he'll tell you. So thank you so much for joining us today. I want to thank everybody who sent us your prayers and sent us your donations on our anniversary giving day last week. It was a hugely successful day for us, and we reached our goal. And from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of our board and our staff, thank you, because every one of those dollars helps us to do really what only America can do, which is to bring a smart Catholic take from an Ignatian perspective on the events in the church and the world. And you make that possible. So thank you. You make it possible with your prayers and with your donations. Both are needed and both are appreciated. Please come back next Friday for another weekly edition of the Of Many Things live stream, and to hear from our very special guest, Cardinal Timothy Dillon, the Archbishop of New York, who is always, well, at a minimum, I'm sure that he'll laugh, and his laugh can't help but cheer you up. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos from American Media. And of course, for this and for all of our content, you can visit us at americamagazine.org. And to subscribe to America, you can visit that website, or you can text the word subscribe to 833 Jesuits. That's 833 Jesuits. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you, and have a good weekend.